Chris Hadfield spent 144 days on the International Space Station. During that time, he lost 10% of his bone density. His heart shrank. His eyes flattened. His immune system weakened. His blood volume decreased. And when he returned to Earth, his body felt foreign to him. This is the story of what 5 months in space really does to the human body. December 21st, 2012. When the Soyuz capsule docked with the International Space Station, Chris Hadfield's body had already begun changing. The 3G force he experienced during launch suddenly dropped to 0 when they reached orbit. And from that moment, the human body, shaped by millions of years of evolution, began trying to survive in an environment it was never designed for. In the first hours, Chris experienced what all astronauts face: space adaptation syndrome. On Earth, we call it space sickness, but it's actually far more complex. Your body's inner ear balance organs become completely confused without gravity. Your brain can't match the images from your eyes with the signals from your inner ear. The result: dizziness, nausea, and complete disorientation. "When I tried to sleep that first night," says Chris, "I didn't know where my head was." The concepts of up and down had vanished. Everything was simultaneously in every direction. But this was just the beginning. The real changes in his body were only starting. During the first week in space, astronauts' faces swell. If you look at Chris Hadfield's early photos, you'll notice his face appears fuller. This is called bird legs puffy face syndrome. Why does this happen? On Earth, gravity pulls most of the blood and fluids in your body down toward your legs. Your heart works to pump this fluid upward. But in space, there's no gravity, so approximately 2 liters of fluid in your body shifts from your legs toward your chest and head. This fluid shift has serious effects. First, your brain thinks there's too much fluid in the body and signals the kidneys to get rid of this excess fluid. As a result, astronauts urinate frequently in the first days, and their bodies lose approximately 1 to 1.5 liters of fluid. But here's the problem. The body doesn't lose the fluid from the legs. It loses it overall. So, blood volume decreases. During Chris Hadfield's first week, his blood volume dropped by 22%. This represents a major change for the heart. Additionally, this excess fluid shifted toward the head and chest blocks the nasal passages. Chris and other astronauts constantly live with stuffy noses. This affects the sense of taste. Food tastes bland in space because the nose is congested. "I lived with constantly stuffy nose for the first weeks," says Chris. "I started preferring strong flavors like hot sauce and mustard because I could only taste those." One of space's most devastating effects on the human body is bone loss. On Earth, your bones are in constant renewal. Cells called osteoblasts create new bone tissue, while cells called osteoclasts break down old bone tissue. This balance is maintained by the stress gravity applies to your bones. But in space, there's no gravity. Your bones bear no weight, and your body thinks, these bones aren't needed. Osteoclast cells become overactive and start breaking down bones. Osteoblast cells slow down. The result is terrifying. The astronauts lose approximately 1% to 2% of their bone density each month. Chris Hadfield spent 144 days, about 5 months, in space. During this time, he lost approximately 10% of his bone density. To put this in perspective, on Earth, an elderly woman loses about 1% of her bone density annually after menopause. Chris experienced 10 years of bone loss in 5 months. The most affected bones are the hip, femur, and vertebrae. These are normally the weight-bearing bones. In space, since they carry no weight, they rapidly weaken. Dr. Smith Johnston, one of NASA's space medicine experts, summarizes, "If an astronaut spends a year in space, their bone density becomes similar to that of a 60 to 70-year-old with osteoporosis." Chris had to exercise approximately 2.5 hours every day to slow this bone loss. But even exercise can't stop bone loss. It only slows it down. Along with bone loss comes muscle loss. Actually, muscle loss happens faster than bone loss. On Earth, your legs carry your body weight every day. When walking, climbing stairs, even sitting, your leg muscles work. But in space, nothing has weight. Chris Hadfield found that pushing off with his fingertips was enough to move around inside the ISS. He barely needed his leg muscles. As a result, the body thinks, "These muscles are unnecessary, they're wasting energy, let's eliminate them." And protein synthesis stops. Muscles rapidly atrophy. Astronauts lose an average of 1% of muscle mass daily in space, especially leg muscles, back muscles, and hip muscles. Chris's quadriceps muscles, front thigh muscles, and gastrocnemius muscles, calf muscles, were particularly affected. After 144 days, he had lost approximately 40% of his leg muscles. That's nearly half. "When I looked at myself in the mirror in space," says Chris, "I didn't recognize my legs. They were thin and weak, like someone else's legs." NASA implements special exercise programs for astronauts to prevent this muscle loss. Chris had to exercise about 2.5 hours daily. 1 hour running on the treadmill, 1 hour resistance exercises, and 30 minutes cycling. But exercising in space is very different. When running on the treadmill, you must use elastic straps that keep your body attached to the belt. Otherwise, you'd fly to the ceiling on your first step. For weight training, vacuum cylinder systems are used because normal weights don't work in zero gravity. And despite all this exercise, muscle loss continues. Exercise only slows the loss, it can't stop it. Perhaps one of space's most surprising effects is on the heart. Chris Hadfield's heart shrank by approximately 11% during his time in space. Why? On Earth, your heart must be strong to pump blood against gravity. Especially pumping blood upward from your legs to your brain is a big job. That's why heart muscles are strong and the heart is large. But in space, there's no gravity. Pumping blood is much easier. The workload on the heart decreases. And the body thinks, "We don't need such a large and strong heart." Heart muscles weaken and the heart shrinks. This shrinkage poses a serious risk for astronauts because when they return to Earth, their hearts suddenly must pump blood against gravity again. But the heart is now weakened. Dr. James Thomas, director of NASA's Cardiovascular Laboratory, explains, "The heart takes on a more spherical shape in space. On Earth, it's longer and oval-shaped. In space, it becomes short and round. This shape change affects the heart's pumping efficiency." Chris Hadfield tried to slow this heart shrinkage through exercise, but the effects were still inevitable. Approximately 60% of astronauts develop eye problems in space. Chris Hadfield was one of them. In zero gravity, excess fluid in the head and chest also accumulates behind the eyes. This fluid accumulation changes the shape of the eyeball. The eyeball flattens, the optic nerve swells. Changes occur in the retina. As a result, astronauts' vision becomes blurry. Near vision is especially affected. Chris noticed he had difficulty reading books while in space. NASA keeps reading glasses of different strengths on the ISS for this problem. In my 4th month in space, says Chris, I had trouble reading small text on control panels. I had to wear glasses. These eye changes are called VIIP, Visual Impairment Intracranial Pressure Syndrome. It's not fully understood yet, but it's a major concern for NASA, because astronauts going to Mars will spend 2 to 3 years in space, and eye damage could become permanent. Fortunately, in Chris's case, the changes were temporary. A few months after returning to Earth, his eyes returned to normal. Space also affects the immune system. Chris Hadfield's immune cells became less effective in space. There are several reasons for this. First, living in space is enormously stressful for the body. Chronic stress suppresses the immune system. Second, zero-gravity conditions affect the functioning of T cells and natural killer cells. Third, sleep quality is poor in space, and good sleep is critical for immunity. Additionally, microorganisms behave differently on the ISS. Bacteria multiply faster in space and become more virulent, higher disease-causing power. A study on Salmonella bacteria found that Salmonella grown in space was 7 times more dangerous than on Earth. Chris and the crew worked hard to keep the ISS clean and prevent microbial contamination. But still, their immune systems weakened. Even a small cut in space carries infection risk, says Chris, because your body isn't as effective at fighting infection. Equally important as physical changes were psychological changes. Chris Hadfield lived in a 73-square-meter space with the same 5 people for 144 days. His family was 400 kilometers away. He repeated the same routine every day. And he knew that at any moment, an equipment failure or accident could endanger their lives. These conditions lead to psychological stress. Astronauts experience confined space syndrome, loneliness, family longing, and chronic stress. Chris used several strategies to cope with these challenges. First, he video called his family daily. NASA considers maintaining family connections very important because it's critical for mental health. Second, he engaged in hobbies. Chris had brought his guitar to the ISS and made music in his free time. He even recorded a cover of David Bowie's Space Oddity on the ISS, and the video went viral. Third, he spent a lot of time watching Earth through the window. Watching Earth gave me peace, says Chris. Every day I could see something new, storms, auroras, city lights. But there were still difficult moments. Some days I missed my family so much, says Chris. All I wanted was to get in the capsule and return to Earth. But I couldn't do that. I had a mission, May 13th, 2013. Chris Hadfield and his crew boarded the Soyuz capsule and departed the ISS. The return to Earth process had begun. During re-entry, the capsule entered the atmosphere at 7.7 kilometers per second. Friction heated the capsule's outer surface to 1,650 degrees Celsius. Chris and his crew experienced 4 to 5 G acceleration. After living in zero gravity for 5 months, this 4 to 5 G felt very heavy to them. My body felt like lead, says Chris. I couldn't lift my head. Even breathing was difficult. When the parachutes opened, the capsule slowed and landed in Kazakhstan's steppe region. When the door opened, Chris smelled fresh air, grass, earth, wind, for the first time in 5 months. But he couldn't stand up. His legs wouldn't support him. The search and rescue team extracted him from the capsule and placed him in a chair. I felt gravity for the first time, says Chris, and it was so heavy. My head was spinning. My stomach was churning. My body didn't feel like it belonged to me. Chris Hadfield's post-return rehabilitation process took approximately 45 days. In the first days, he couldn't walk. His balance organs needed time to adjust to gravity. His leg muscles were very weak. His bones were fragile. His heart struggled to pump blood. NASA's astronaut rehabilitation program gradually restored him. Physical therapy, resistance exercises, swimming, balanced nutrition, and cardiovascular exercises. But full recovery took much longer. It took approximately 3 to 4 years for his bone density to return to normal. Some bones, especially in the hip and spine, never fully returned to their original state. Chris never recovered some of the bone density he lost in space. Muscle loss recovered faster. Muscle mass returned to normal in about 6 months. But it took 1 year for muscle strength and endurance to fully return. His heart returned to its original size in 6 to 8 months. Eye changes resolved in 2 to 3 months. The immune system normalized within a few weeks. Chris Hadfield's experience isn't unique. It's universal among astronauts. But what makes his story particularly valuable is how openly he's shared his experience. Most astronauts face similar challenges, but few document them as thoroughly. NASA's Human Research Program has been studying these effects for decades. The data from Chris and hundreds of other astronauts has revealed crucial insights. Bone loss patterns. Not all bones lose density equally. Weight-bearing bones, hips, spine, legs lose the most. Arm bones and skull bones lose much less. This tells us the loss is directly related to mechanical loading, not just zero gravity itself. Muscle fiber. Changes in space, slow-twitch muscle fibers used for endurance convert to fast-twitch fibers used for quick movements. This makes sense evolutionarily. You don't need endurance in zero gravity, but you do need quick reflexive movements. However, this conversion is problematic for Earth return. Cardiovascular adaptation. The heart doesn't just shrink, it fundamentally reorganizes. The left ventricle, which normally pumps against gravity, becomes less muscular. Blood vessels in the legs constrict because they're no longer needed to fight gravity. When astronauts return to Earth, this can cause orthostatic intolerance. They can't stand up without fainting. Genetic changes. Recent research shows that space travel affects gene expression. Some genes related to DNA repair, immune function, and bone formation turn on or off in space. Some of these changes persist for months or even years after return. Everything Chris experienced in 144 days would be magnified exponentially on a Mars mission. The journey to Mars takes 6 to 9 months each way. Astronauts would spend approximately 2 to 3 years total in space or on Mars, which has only 38% of Earth's gravity. Current projections suggest that without major technological breakthroughs, Mars astronauts could lose 20 to 30% of bone density, lose 50 to 60% of muscle mass, experience significant vision impairment, possibly permanent, have weakened immune systems making them vulnerable to infections, face cardiovascular problems upon Earth, return experience psychological stress from isolation. NASA and other space agencies are working on solutions. Artificial gravity, rotating spacecraft that create centrifugal force, still theoretical for large-scale missions, pharmaceutical interventions, drugs that slow bone loss and muscle atrophy. Some show promise in trials. Enhanced exercise equipment, more effective resistance systems that better simulate Earth gravity. Genetic therapies. Future possibility of modifying gene expression to better adapt to space. Better nutrition. Optimize diets that minimize calcium loss and maximize protein retention. While much attention focuses on physical changes, the psychological impact of long-duration spaceflight may be equally challenging. Chris Hadfield was fortunate. He had excellent psychological training, a supportive crew, and the ability to communicate regularly with his family. But even with all these advantages, he experienced difficult moments. There were nights I'd float in my sleep pod, looking at photos of my family, and just feel this overwhelming loneliness, Chris revealed in later interviews. You're surrounded by the most advanced technology humanity has ever created, but you'd trade it all for a simple hug from your wife or kids. The psychological stressors in space are unique. Confinement. Living in 73 square meters with the same people for months creates tension. Even the best selected crews have conflicts. Isolation. Being physically separated from everyone else on Earth creates existential loneliness. Danger. Knowing that a single equipment failure could kill everyone creates constant background anxiety. Monotony. Despite the novelty of space, daily routines become repetitive and boring. Delayed communication. Even talking to family has delays and feels artificial through screens. NASA's psychological support includes weekly private video conferences with family, regular sessions with space psychologists, carefully selected personal items and comfort objects, scheduled care packages with surprise gifts from Earth-planned special events and celebrations. But these measures only mitigate, they don't eliminate, the psychological burden. Despite all the challenges, Chris Hadfield, like most astronauts, describes his time in space as transformative in a positive way. The overview effect is a cognitive shift reported by many astronauts. From space, you see Earth as a fragile, borderless sphere floating in the cosmic void. National boundaries disappear. Political conflicts seem trivial. The unity and vulnerability of humanity becomes viscerally apparent. Every time I looked at Earth, says Chris, I felt this profound connection to everyone down there, all 7 billion people, all part of this one precious planet. It changed how I see everything. This perspective shift often persists long after return. Many astronauts become environmental advocates, peace activists, or educators, driven by the urgent need to share what they have learned. For Chris, the overview effect made all the physical suffering worthwhile. My body paid a price, he says, but my soul gained something invaluable. Chris Hadfield's 144-day mission provides crucial data for future space exploration. Some key lessons. 1. Current life support is insufficient for Mars. We need major breakthroughs in artificial gravity, pharmaceuticals, or both. 2. Psychological support is as important as physical. Mental health must be a priority, not an afterthought. 3. Rehabilitation must improve. Recovery protocols need to be faster and more effective. 4. Individual variation matters. Not all astronauts respond the same way. Personalized medicine will be crucial. 5. Transparency helps. Chris's openness about his struggles has advanced scientific understanding and public support. Chris Hadfield's 144-day experience in space demonstrates painfully that the human body wasn't designed for space. Millions of years of evolution shaped us for Earth's gravity. In space, our bodies struggle. Bone loss, muscle atrophy, heart shrinkage, eye changes, immune weakening. These are all consequences of the body trying to adapt to space. And tragically, this adaptation actually means the body destroying itself. NASA and other space agencies are working to solve these problems. Artificial gravity systems, drugs, more effective exercise equipment are being researched because astronauts going to Mars will spend 2 to 3 years in space and, under current conditions, staying in space that long carries a risk of permanent damage. Chris Hadfield's experience shows how difficult and dangerous space exploration is, but it also demonstrates the power of human will. Chris knowingly accepted all these physical and psychological challenges, because for science to advance, someone had to take this risk. "My body paid the price," says Chris, "but I don't regret it. Being in space, seeing Earth from that perspective, expanding humanity's knowledge boundaries, it was all worth it. And perhaps in the future, when technology advances, living in space won't be this destructive. But for now, astronauts like Chris Hadfield sacrifice their bodies in the name of science. This is the true face of heroism. Every data point from Chris's mission, every percentage of bone lost, every measurement of muscle atrophy, every heartbeat recorded, contributes to humanity's knowledge. Future Mars explorers will benefit from what Chris endured. Better countermeasures will be developed, safer protocols will be established. But we should never forget the price. Chris Hadfield and astronauts like him give their health so humanity can reach for the stars. They return to Earth with weakened bodies but strengthened spirits, carrying knowledge that will help our species become truly spacefaring. The 144 days Chris spent in space weren't just a mission, they were a sacrifice, a gift to future generations who will travel farther, stay longer, and ultimately live permanently beyond Earth. And when those future explorers set foot on Mars, they'll owe a debt to pioneers like Chris Hadfield, who showed us both the wonders and the terrible costs of leaving our home planet behind.